When you spit into a tube and send it to 23andMe, AncestryDNA, or MyHeritage, a laboratory in California or Utah or Ireland reads about 700,000 points along your genome. A few weeks later, a colorful map appears on your phone, telling you that you are 72% British and Irish, 11% French and German, 6% Scandinavian, and so on. You glance at the result, share it with a cousin, and move on with your day. But almost nobody asks the question that matters. Compared against what? Your DNA does not arrive at the lab with a label on it. The machines that read your genome have no idea where your ancestors lived in 1650 or 1820. The percentages on your screen exist only because scientists, decades ago, picked a small number of people whose ancestry they were confident about, sequenced their DNA, and made them the benchmark. Every modern ancestry result is, in effect, a statistical comparison between your genome and the genome of those reference people. And the most influential reference panel in the history of human genetics, the panel that helped define what European even means inside a DNA test, was built from just 30 families in Utah. This is the story of who they were, why they were chosen, and why their bloodline now sits quietly behind the percentages on your screen. Paris, 1983. A French immunologist named Jean Dausset, who had already won the Nobel Prize for his work on the human leukocyte antigen system, founded an organization called the Centre d'études du polymorphisme humain. The name was practical rather than poetic. The Center for the Study of Human Polymorphism. Its mission was simple: build a single shared reference set of human families whose DNA could be used by laboratories around the world to map the human genome. Dausset understood something his colleagues sometimes forgot. Without a common reference, every laboratory was effectively measuring with a different ruler. You could not compare a study in Tokyo to a study in Boston unless they were all looking at the same families. So CEPH began collecting 3-generation pedigrees: grandparents, parents, and children. The 3 generations were essential because they allowed geneticists to track which stretches of DNA were inherited together, building what is called a linkage map. Dausset gathered 10 French families from his own work on HLA. A colleague named Ken Kidd contributed a Pennsylvania Amish family. Another, Nancy Wexler, contributed 2 Venezuelan families from her famous work on Huntington's disease. But the largest single contribution to the CEPH reference panel came from one place and from one researcher. That researcher was Ray White, working out of the University of Utah in Salt Lake City. Between 1980 and the mid-1980s, White and his team recruited 47 to 48 large, 3-generation families from the Latter-day Saint community in Utah. They drew blood. They built immortalized cell lines so that the same DNA could be studied for decades. And they cataloged the family relationships in extraordinary detail. Why Utah? Why Latter-day Saints? The answer has nothing to do with religion and everything to do with documentation. The Latter-day Saint community had spent more than a century building one of the most comprehensive genealogical archives ever assembled. The Family History Library in Salt Lake City held microfilmed church records, parish registers, ship manifests, and pedigree charts going back to the 1500s in England, Scandinavia, and Germany. By the time White began his project, the University of Utah had already started linking those genealogies to medical records, creating what would eventually become the Utah Population Database. That database now contains information on over 7 million individuals, much of it traceable back to the original Mormon pioneer stock of the 1840s and the 1850s. For a geneticist, this was the closest thing to perfect raw material. Large families, often with 8 or 10 siblings in the youngest generation. Living grandparents who could donate blood and confirm the pedigree. And documented ancestry going back generations, so the population structure was clearly understood. Ray White's Utah families became the workhorse of the CEPH panel. And out of his collection of 47 extended Utah families, a smaller subset emerged that would change the world. That subset was 30 trios. A trio, in genetic terms, is the simplest unit of inheritance. One mother, one father, one child. 30 mothers, 30 fathers, 30 children. 90 people. These 90 Utah Mormons, drawn from the larger CEPH collection, were labeled with a 3-letter code that anyone working in human genetics would come to know on sight. CEU, Utah residents of Northern and Western European ancestry. When the International HapMap project launched in 2003 to map common patterns of human genetic variation, it needed reference populations. It chose 4: Yoruba families from Ibadan in Nigeria, Han Chinese families from Beijing, Japanese families from Tokyo, and the 30 CEU trios from Utah. When the 1,000 Genomes project followed, sequencing whole genomes rather than just sampling them, the same Utah families were sequenced again. Their data sits in public repositories used by every major laboratory on Earth. When researchers at Decode Genetics in Reykjavik, the Sanger Institute in Cambridge, or the Broad Institute in Boston need a baseline for what European DNA looks like, they often pull the CEU files. And when 23andMe, AncestryDNA, and MyHeritage built their commercial ancestry pipelines, they inherited those reference panels. They have since expanded them, added new populations, and built proprietary refinements. But the bedrock of what British, Irish, Northwestern European, and Anglo-Saxon means inside a consumer DNA test still traces back, in part, to those 30 trios in Utah. Which raises the obvious next question. Who exactly were those Utah families, in ancestry terms? To answer that, you have to understand the demographic history of 19th century Utah. When Brigham Young led the first pioneer company into the Salt Lake Valley in July of 1847, the settlers were overwhelmingly Anglo-American. They had come from New York, Ohio, Illinois, Missouri, and the New England states. Many of them traced their colonial roots to Massachusetts Bay, Plymouth, Virginia, and the early Quaker migrations into Pennsylvania. They were Mayflower descendants. They were Cavalier descendants. They were Scots-Irish from the Appalachian frontier. They were Pennsylvania Dutch and Welsh Quakers. Then a second wave arrived, and this wave is what makes the Utah genetic story distinctive. The Latter-day Saint Church had established a British mission in 1837, sending missionaries to industrial Lancashire, the Scottish Lowlands, Wales, and Ireland. The response was extraordinary. Tens of thousands of converts from the British Isles emigrated to Nauvoo, Illinois, and then onward to Utah after 1847. Between 1860 and 1880, roughly 22 to 24% of Utah's entire population was British-born. About 67% of all foreign-born Utahns came from the British Isles. They were Lancashire weavers, Cornish tin miners, Welsh iron workers from the Merthyr Tydfil coalfields, Scottish farmers from Ayrshire and Lanarkshire, and Irish converts from County Tyrone and Belfast. To this Anglo-American and British core, smaller streams added Scandinavian converts from Denmark, Sweden, and Norway, along with Swiss and German converts from the Rhineland, Württemberg, and Switzerland's Bernese Highlands. There were Welsh converts who carried Cymric surnames like Jones, Davis, Williams, Evans, and Morgan. There were Danish converts from Jutland and Sjaelland who brought the Andersons, Hansens, Jensens, and Petersons, whose descendants would later populate Sanpete County and the Sevier Valley. But the demographic engine of 19th century Utah was Anglo, British, Scots-Irish, Welsh, and colonial American Anglo-Saxon stock, marrying within the community for several generations. For a population geneticist, this combination is exactly what creates a clean reference signal. A founder effect, where a relatively small founding population expanded rapidly over 5 or 6 generations with limited outside admixture, produces descendants whose DNA looks remarkably consistent. The 47 CEPH families that Ray White recruited in the early 1980s were, in genetic terms, the great-grandchildren of those pioneer founders. Their genomes carried a concentrated, well-documented signature of Anglo-European ancestry. In the male line, that signature shows up as a heavy enrichment of certain Y chromosome haplogroups. R1b-U106, sometimes called the Germanic or Anglo-Saxon branch, is common. R1b-L21, the dominant Atlantic Celtic lineage of Ireland, Scotland, Wales, and Cornwall, is also widespread. R1b-P312 appears in the Welsh and West Country lines. Haplogroup I1, associated with Scandinavian and Anglo-Saxon settlement, appears in the expected proportions. There are also small enrichments of EV13 and J haplogroups carried by individual Mediterranean lineages that filtered into Northwestern Europe over the past 2,000 years. In the female line, mitochondrial haplogroups H, J, T, K, and U dominate, exactly as you would expect from a population descended from medieval Northwestern Europeans. This is the bloodline that, through the CEU panel, became the genetic yardstick of the Anglosphere. If you are finding this story useful, take a moment now to subscribe to Anglo Origins. We publish a new documentary every week on the deep ancestry, colonial migration, and genetic history of the English-speaking world. The next episode looks specifically at founding father bloodlines and what their direct descendants show on modern DNA tests. Subscribe now so you do not miss it. By the early 2000s, the importance of the Utah families had spread far beyond the Human Genome Project. Now think about what this means for you, the descendant, watching this in your living room. If your AncestryDNA result says you are 70 or 80% British and Irish, and your family has been in America since the 17th century, that percentage is not coming out of thin air. The algorithm has compared the long stretches of DNA in your genome against reference panels, including the CEU Utah samples, and against expanded British, Scottish, Irish, and Welsh panels built more recently from people still living in those countries. It has found that your DNA shares the same patterns of variation. It has placed you, statistically, inside the same population cluster as those Utah families. That is why Mayflower descendants in Massachusetts, Cavalier descendants in Virginia, Scots-Irish families across the Appalachians, from Pennsylvania to Tennessee, Pennsylvania Dutch in Lancaster County, and old stock Quaker families in Philadelphia so often see remarkably similar percentages on their ancestry results. They are all, in genetic terms, branches of the same Northwestern European founding stock that arrived between 1607 and the great waves of the 18th and 19th centuries. The Utah pioneers were one branch of that tree. The Mayflower passengers were another. The Ulster Scots who poured into the Carolinas and the Cumberland Gap in the 1700s were a third. The Tidewater Cavaliers who settled Virginia were a fourth. The DNA tells the truth that the genealogies have always implied. Consider what this means for the founding father bloodlines. George Washington's direct ancestors came from Sulgrave Manor in Northamptonshire. John Adams traced his lineage back to Henry Adams of Braintree in Somerset, who emigrated to Massachusetts Bay in 1638. Thomas Jefferson's paternal line ran to Snowdonia in Wales, with strong Cavalier connections through his mother's Randolph line. Benjamin Franklin's family came from Ecton in Northamptonshire. These are exactly the same Northwestern European founding populations that the Utah pioneers came from 1 or 2 centuries later. When a verified Washington descendant takes an AncestryDNA test today, the result clusters in the same statistical space as the CEU reference samples. The bloodline is, in measurable terms, the same bloodline. And this explains something that often confuses American test takers. People will see their result and ask, why does it say I am British when my family has been here for 400 years? The answer is that DNA does not understand passports or addresses. It only understands ancestry. Your DNA is comparing itself to a Lancashire weaver who emigrated in 1855, or to a Yorkshire farmer who landed at Boston in 1635, or to a Scots-Irish Presbyterian who came down the Great Wagon Road into the Shenandoah Valley in 1740. It cannot tell the difference. Genetically, you are still descended from those people. The country of residence is irrelevant. The bloodline persists across centuries. There is a quieter point inside this story too. The Utah Genome Project, which is the modern successor to the CEPH work, has now sequenced additional generations of the original families. Their data is helping researchers map de novo mutations, predict longevity, and identify the genetic basis of rare diseases like multiple myeloma and certain cardiovascular conditions. Because the Utah pedigrees are so extensive and so well documented, they continue to be among the most scientifically valuable family collections in the world. That means the 30 Utah trios and the wider 47 families behind them did not just shape 20th century genetics. They are still shaping 21st century medicine. When a new variant is discovered in the human genome, it is often compared against the Utah families first to determine its frequency in a Northern European population. When a pharmaceutical company tests how a drug might be metabolized differently across populations, the Utah samples are in the dataset. When researchers at the University of Utah's Huntsman Cancer Institute study inherited cancer risk in Mormon families, they draw on the same pedigrees that built the human genome's linkage map 4 decades ago. The bloodline of the Anglo-American pioneer descendants has become, in a very real sense, woven into the foundations of modern human genetic science. So, when you look at your ancestry result, and you see the colors of the British Isles spreading across your map, remember what is actually happening. Inside that calculation are real people. A Latter-day Saint grandmother in Salt Lake City who gave a vial of blood to Ray White in 1981. Her husband, a third-generation rancher whose great-grandfather walked from Liverpool to the Salt Lake Valley in 1856. Their daughter, born in the 1950s, raising her own children in the shadow of the Wasatch Mountains. 3 generations of one family, preserved in a freezer in Paris and in Salt Lake City and at the Coriell Institute in Camden, New Jersey, now serving as the reference point for the genetic identity of millions of their distant cousins around the English-speaking world. You are not just looking at a percentage on a screen. You are looking at a measurement taken against the bloodline of your own people. The Lancashire weavers and the Cornish tin miners, the Mayflower passengers and the Cavalier planters, the Ulster Scots of the Appalachian frontier, the Yorkshire farmers who became Iowa farmers, who became Utah pioneers, the Welsh Methodists, the Scottish lowlanders, the Danish converts from Jutland, all of them woven together inside a single statistical model and now reflected back at you when you ask the question your ancestors could never have answered. Who were we, really? The 30 families in Utah gave science an answer. The rest of the Anglosphere has been quietly comparing itself against that answer ever since. If this story matters to you, and if you want to understand more about your own colonial, British, Scots-Irish, or pioneer ancestry, the deeper genealogical and genetic history is waiting for you here on Anglo Origins. Every documentary on this channel is written for the descendants. We treat your bloodline with the seriousness it deserves, because it is yours, and because it carries the story of a people who built much of the modern world. Click the next video on your screen to continue. Your ancestors are waiting.